After the lively and multifaceted philosophical discussions of the ancient age, philosophical thought in the Middle Ages began to take shape more around religion and theology. During this period, philosophers tried to establish the relationship between faith and reason, and they also thought deeply about the basic building blocks of existence. One of the most important issues of this intellectual quest has been the problem of universals. Universals are abstract representations of properties common to more than one entity. For example, concepts such as humanity, redness, or justice are universals. One of the fundamental questions of philosophy has been whether these universals exist in the real world, and if so, how they exist and their relationship with knowledge. Medieval philosophers focused on the existence and nature of universals and were divided into two main views: realism and nominalism. According to realists, universals are not just abstract concepts that exist in our minds, but also have an independent existence in the real world. Among the philosophers who defended this view are important names such as Augustine, Boethius, Erigena, Anselmus, Thomas Aquinas, and Duns Scotus. Nominalists, on the other hand, argue that universals have no independent existence in the real world, but are merely general concepts that occur in the minds of particulars. The most important representative of this view is William of Ockham. This fundamental distinction between realists and nominalists gave rise to a debate that lasted for many years in medieval philosophy. While realists have presented various arguments to prove the existence of universals, hunters have also defended their views against these arguments. For example, while realists argued for the universal nature of universals and their use in language, nominalists argued that universals are abstract concepts that exist only in the mind and have no counterparts in the real world. In this debate, some philosophers, such as Abelard, adopted a more moderate approach. Abelard argued that universals have a counterpart both in the mind and in the external world, but that this counterpart is only a name or concept. The problem of universals has been one of the most fundamental and longest-lasting debates in medieval philosophy. This debate has had important implications in many fields, including theory of knowledge, metaphysics, philosophy of language, and even theology. The problem of universals is closely related to fundamental philosophical questions, such as the nature of knowledge, the structure of the universe, and the existence of God. These comprehensive discussions on universals in the Middle Ages left a deep mark on philosophy in later periods and became an important turning point in the history of philosophy. In medieval philosophy, the problem of universals centered on the question of whether general concepts exist in the real world, and if so, how they exist. Following the devastation caused by the barbarian invasion, medieval Europe entered a period long described as the Dark Ages. During this period, the legacy of ancient Greek philosophy was largely lost and philosophical thought was shaped around Christian theology. However, with the translation movements and the establishment of universities that began in the 12th century, philosophy was revived and a unique system of thought called medieval philosophy emerged. In particular, the translation of Aristotle's works from the Arabic world into Latin opened a new horizon for medieval philosophers. Thanks to these translations, medieval philosophers had the opportunity to conduct more in-depth studies on topics such as logic, metaphysics, and ethics. With the establishment of universities, philosophical discussions became more systematic. Logic courses given at universities contributed to the development of students' critical thinking and reasoning skills. Medieval philosophy is intertwined with Christian theology. While philosophers tried to establish the relationship between faith and reason, they tried to explain Christian doctrines philosophically. The two main periods of medieval philosophy, the patristic and scholastic periods. Patristic period. During this period, the philosophical works of the Church Fathers who lived in the early periods of Christianity came to the fore. Thinkers such as Augustine and Boethius tried to explain the Christian faith with philosophical concepts. Scholastic period. During this period, philosophy and theology were taught systematically in universities. Philosophers such as Aquinas, Duns Scotus, and William of Ockham developed important philosophical systems by synthesizing Aristotle's philosophy with Christianity. One of the most important debates in medieval philosophy is the existence and nature of universals. Universals raise the question of whether general concepts, such as humanity or beauty, exist in the real world. The philosophical studies conducted during this period were an important turning point in the development of Western philosophy. Medieval philosophy is a unique system of thought that emerged from the combination of the legacy of ancient Greek philosophy and Christian theology. Thanks to the establishment of universities and translation movements, philosophical debates were revived, and philosophy became one of the fundamental disciplines of Western thought. While medieval philosophers tried to establish the relationship between faith and reason, they also sought answers to fundamental philosophical questions such as existence, knowledge, and morality. The problem of universals is one of the fundamental questions of philosophy and asks, in short, how we can grasp the general properties of particular things. For example, the concept we express with the word table refers to a set of features that are common to all tables beyond a concrete table. So how does this general feature or universal exist in the real world, and how do we arrive at these concepts? Are there universals? So do general concepts have real equivalents? If universals exist, in what form do they exist? Do universals exist in the material world or in our minds? Are universals independent of individual things? That is, do general concepts exist before particular things, or do they emerge after them? Are universals dependent on individual things? That is, are general concepts an abstraction of the common properties of particular things? Universals, particulars, and singulars. Universal. It is an abstract representation of properties that are common to more than one particular. For example, concepts such as humanity and redness are universals. Particular. A particular entity that belongs to a certain class but is not specific to that class. For example, this table, that tree, etc. Singular. A being that is unique and one of a kind, unlike anything else, such as Socrates or Hagia Sophia. Historical development of the problem of universals. The problem of universals has roots dating back to the ancient philosophers Plato and Aristotle. While Plato argued in her theory of ideas that there are ideal forms corresponding to universals, Aristotle argued that universals are found in particular things. In the Middle Ages, philosophers, especially Porphyry and Boethius, made the problem of universals more systematized. The importance of the problem of universals. The problem of universals is a fundamental problem that has important implications in many areas of philosophy. The concept of universals has been addressed in different ways in fields such as theory of knowledge, metaphysics, philosophy of language, and even theology. The problem of universals is closely related to fundamental philosophical questions such as the nature of knowledge, the structure of the universe, and the meaning of language. Realism had an important place in medieval philosophy and was defended by many philosophers. Among these philosophers there are important names such as Augustine, Boethius, Erigena, Anselmus, Thomas Aquinas, and Duns Scotus. Augustine, who laid the philosophical foundations of Christianity, argued that universals exist in the divine mind and form the basis of creation. Boethius, synthesizing the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, Boethius proposed that universals exist both in the mind and in the real world. Thomas Aquinas, combining Aristotle's philosophy with Christianity, Aquinas argued that universals exist within particular things and constitute their essence. Realism is a view that has an important place in the history of philosophy and has led to many debates. Realism has played an important role in seeking answers to fundamental philosophical questions such as the nature of knowledge, the structure of the universe, and the meaning of language. However, realism has also been subject to some criticism. For example, questions such as how universals come into being, how they are perceived, and how they can be known have been seen as difficult problems for realism to solve. Realism is an important philosophical view that defends the claim that universals have an independent existence in the real world. This view has led to a long and complex debate in the history of philosophy and has encountered many different interpretations. Realism offers an important perspective that allows us to think deeply about one of the fundamental problems of philosophy: the nature of knowledge and the structure of the universe. Augustine and the divine illumination and the eternal ideas. Augustine attributes the origin of universals, that is, general concepts, to the eternal ideas that exist in the mind of God. The human mind can reach these ideals through a divine light. This view makes Augustine a strict realist. According to her, universals are universal principles that exist before particular things and give them meaning. Boethius, a moderate approach. Boethius argues that universals can exist both in the mind and in the real world. According to her, universals are found in particular things and are abstracted from them. This approach is more moderate than Augustine's strict realism. Boethius states that universals can be grasped at different levels and that the highest level of grasping is a divine faculty. Erigena and divine origin. Erigena argues with a Platonic approach that universals are ideas in the mind of God. Universals are the primitive powers that give essence to things in the sensory world and bring them into being. According to Erigena, the source of all beings is God, and universals come from this source. Anselm's faith-reason unity. Anselm thinks that universals are found both in the mind of God and in sensory things. The human mind can reach universals through a divine light, but faith is also necessary for this access. Anselmus is a philosopher famous for her ontological proof of God, trying to prove theological realities through universals. Aquinas suggests that universals can exist in three different ways. This threefold understanding of existence in the mind of God, in particular things, and as an abstract concept in the mind makes Aquinas a moderate realist. Universals, according to Aquinas, constitute the essence of particular things and are obtained from them by abstraction. Duns Scotus, common nature and the principle of individuation. Duns Scotus argues that universals are the common natures that are found in common to particular things. This common nature enables us to classify particular things according to their kinds. However, every particular thing has its own principle of individuation. This principle separates particular things from one another. Abelard, between realism and nominalism. Abelard argues that universals are abstractions created in the mind. This approach builds a bridge between both realism and nominalism. According to Abelard, although universals have no equivalent in the real world, they exist as meaningful wholes in language. William of Ockham, Nominalism and Occam's Razor. William of Ockham argues that universals do not exist in the real world, but are merely signs in language. This view is one of the most radical examples of nominalism. Ockham uses the principle of simplicity, known as Occam's razor, to argue that we should not multiply entities unnecessarily. Accepting the existence of universals means multiplying the entities unnecessarily. Therefore, she argues that universals are merely concepts in the mind. Medieval philosophers approached the problem of universals from different perspectives. These differences paved the way for one of the most important debates in the history of philosophy. The problem of universals continues to be discussed today in fields such as computer philosophy, philosophy of language, and metaphysics.